I'm not going to interview. I'll leave you to talk about AquAid and the many things you've been involved with. Thank you.
Many things I've been involved in. I might get arrested. Yes, I would like JP Morgan's organiser for PowerPoint. This is mine. My wife still called me a spoilt brat the other day. She's probably right as well. What I'm going to talk to you about is a business that, well, I'd like to put a proposition to you. I'd like to start by asking you a question. And I know there are accountants here and they like these kind of questions. There are two organisations, two separate organisations, and they are both planning to enter the UK water cooler market. And one of these organisations is a global food giant called Nestlé. And they are going to be prepared to invest, in the end, tens of millions of pounds. Some of that investment is spent on recruiting industry expertise, some on branding and marketing, some on acquisitions to buy market share. Buying market share enables them to have volume so that they can then create or build a bespoke bottling plant to reduce their costs, obviously, and the economies of scale will give them increased margin. And the other organisation is headed up by a team of precisely two people. These two people know nothing about the water cooler industry. Always helps. They have neither assets nor a successful business background. They're so short of funds that they couldn't start a local water cooler business. However, one of them has a brother who has a successful regional water cooler company, and they use that as the model upon which to base a franchise. In order to obtain water, they're going to have to purchase it from somebody who's already producing it, a contract bottler. That's going to relate to lower margins. On top of that, they're also going to give 40p a bottle to help provide water to communities in Africa. In addition to this, the brothers fall out so that the one with the business on which the model is based becomes relatively uncooperative and doesn't really want to release information. Now, you can imagine, can't you? There's Nestlé preparing their business plans. There's me driving to a friend who understands Excel, which to me at the time was like some sort of magic art. And he explained it to me in such a fashion that it remained quite a mystery for some time. He'd spend most of his time doing something else and I'd ask him questions. Anyway, we ended up with our business plan, and I wonder what you would say. Which of these two organisations, ultimately, out of the two of them, who are you going to put your money on? Which one's ultimately going to fail and who's going to succeed? Now, I believe in a God. I believe ultimately that God created the universe out of nothing. And finally, that's really what my underlying faith was in. I know that there are some very clever people who would also agree that in the beginning there was nothing, and then nothing created everything. You have to be very clever to be able to make that model work. But our total budget to establish this national franchise was £30,000. Now, I'm still grateful to the loan guarantee scheme, which the government had at the time. One of the requirements for qualifying for funding under the loan guarantee scheme was that you were to have no assets. We qualified under that, there was no problem. And so far, so good. You see, the real problem was we couldn't have started one of our own franchises because to start one of our franchises, you needed £70,000 and we only had 30. So we set off and we spent £500 on a consultant. Normally I hate spending money on consultants. I feel I'm far too clever to ask anybody anything. It was really actually a good move because he gave us some salient advice. I didn't really like the advice because I'd created this franchise prospectus, which with a friend of mine I thought was quite sufficient, got the points across well, and he thought it was lacked a certain professionalism. He advised us to get a graphic designer and spend some money on some proper marketing material. He also advised us to pay a lawyer to create a franchise agreement as an essential component of that business model. I love spending money on lawyers. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy writing checks for lawyers, especially when it comes to about 15% of your entire budget. So we spent about £4,500 on a franchise agreement, which actually, to be fair, transpired to be excellent value. We spent a further £6,000, something like that, on organising this prospectus. We then booked the smallest stand that you could book at the Wembley exhibition franchise, which was a forthcoming event. We created some boards for that, and we advertised in the national press for franchisees. And all the funds are, even though we're not taking any salaries, the funds are dwindling and the money's disappearing. Basically, what happened next was that we were trying to make a living whilst at the same time start a business. A very difficult thing to do. And if you're undercapitalised, obviously you focus on keeping your costs down. A friend of mine, the guy that I was working with, he worked as a bookie's clerk at the weekends at Point to Points with a guy who used to know the Cray twins and apparently was quite mad. He was very careful that he made sure he got all the financial aspects of that arrangement correct. And I was working on something called the Home Energy Efficiency Scheme, which basically was offering free draft proofing and energy advice to impoverished people in London. So we get to the exhibition, we got one shot, we're running out of money, and our exhibition stand was as bad as you can possibly imagine. It was 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep. It was kind of like a funnel web spider's trap. If you've ever been to an exhibition, it's very hard to get people onto the stand. You want a corner stand, you want a bit of space so they don't feel that you're herding them in and then going to beat them up until they say yes. And another thing that's interesting about exhibitions is this. As we walked around before it opened, there are all these companies that had spent large amounts of money. I saw a helicopter on one stand and everything looked very grand. We had, if you like, a God incident because someone had cancelled in one of the main aisles and we got moved to a 4x3, which was a much better venue. But really, what an exhibition's about is once all the people get in there, the reality of the flashy stand is reduced and marginalised because you can't see it properly because there's so many people. And we made sure that we pulled everyone. So we were standing in the aisles and ensuring that we got a proposition of what our business was about across. And we started in August, I think we recruited our first franchisee. Because we didn't know anything about the business and the seasonality of it, that's the worst possible time you could start, August, September, October, because obviously you're starting to run into the winter months when people aren't particularly interested in water coolers. Basically, these franchisees that we'd recruited, we had used the British Franchise Association's recommended stringent qualification methods before appointing a franchisee. In other words, make sure their check's cleared. And they got started, and basically, by Christmas, some of them were quite suicidal. Especially the guy in Yorkshire, he just didn't believe people would buy water when they could get it for nothing out of the tap. And the guy that I was working with, he did something really brave, because what we used to do, our marketing strategy was to put water coolers out on a free trial. 7 days later, we'd ring you up and say, hey, how'd you like it? Do you want to keep it? And our franchisee was saying, nobody wants this thing. Nobody wants to keep them. It's hopeless, useless. We're dead in the water. Excuse the pun. Anyway, he went down there and there was a list of leads. And I don't know if I'd had the courage to do this. And he said, okay then. And he picked up the phone, rang the first guy with a water cooler. And yeah, the guy will have it. So what's the problem? Carry on. And basically, we discovered, I think, that through faith, you are able to persevere. And to me, perseverance is an interesting quality because what it demonstrates in reality is that faith is still alive. Anyway, meanwhile, Nestle, they kind of wheeled out this shiny juggernaut that they had. And we, at the time, we had 2 vehicles, 2 company cars. They were old Rovers with Honda engines because Hondas are very reliable. And the water cooler business is quite difficult. And franchising is an interesting model because what happens is that people get involved in franchising because they don't quite want to go where no man's been before. They want some sort of idea as to the direction the business is going to take. And there's a high level of capital investment at the front end and a small return because if you can imagine, you've got to have a warehouse, you need to have a salesperson, you need a delivery driver, and then you start putting machines out, and your return's very low. So it's about a 2-year break-even period. And over 2 years, people can get very cheesed off with you. And they start to worry, and they start to wonder, are we going to go down? Are we going to survive? And in that sort of scenario, what you find is that the fear, really, that these people have is something that drives them to behave in a fashion which can be detrimental, because unity is essential in any environment or endeavour. And we ended up with a scenario where basically there was a bit of a rebellion. We managed to quell that, and we came out the other side. And having come out of the other side, the remarkable thing is that we have today 2 million people drinking water as a result of our commercial activity. What we do is we invest in wells. They're paid for by AquAid. Last year, Nestle were losing £1 million a month in the same industry, having invested £100 million. They never provided water for anybody, and they don't provide water for anybody in this country either at the moment. They sold that business for £6 million. And 10 years ago, who would have bet on us? And it is written, all things are possible with God. Now, to those of you who don't believe, what I'd like to say is this. A business plan is a piece of conjecture that you don't know whether it will work or not, no matter who's constructed it, until you try to put it into practice. That is faith in action. It's the same with the Bible. Until you actually put it into practice, you will not know whether it's true or not. I have discovered that it is true. We've got some current challenges. We're in a mature market. Margins are being squeezed. We've got a difficult economy. So what we've done is we have started a business to add on to the existing one, which is the remanufacturing of toner cartridges. That's a good industry because about 50% of companies in this country use original equipment. One of the reasons they use original equipment and why some companies have a policy that they won't use remanufactured cartridges is because of the dubious quality of remanufacturing. So what we've done is we've invested in ensuring that we're going to be able to provide a top quality product, because if you can provide a top quality product at a reduced cost and you can prove to the market that you can do that, we believe people will come on board. And we've had our first large customer, I call it large, I mean, that we're going to be saving them about £40,000 a year. And the chap that was up here before me, Livingston, some of the money from the sale of the cartridges is going to fund his entrepreneurial training. Because I am a great believer in the fact that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity in countries like Africa. There is. There's tremendous faith there. It needs to be harnessed. Initiative needs to be taken, and one of the great things that's really important, and I feel passionate about, is people's attitudes. Really, it's a question of believing that you can achieve. But there you go, enough from the lunatic. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well,